So with Season 1 of The Rings of Power completely finished, it's time to give you our full thoughts. Let's get into it.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
I'm going to break this review up into sections to make it more digestible. I will talk briefly about the casting, the cinematography and visual effects, music, and then props and costume. Then I will go into more detail of the story and the lore. So the casting was obviously something that we had news about before anything else. There was immediate internet backlash for a lot of the casting, which I didn't think was cool. After seeing the cast in action for a full season, I can safely say that the casting was decent. Certainly not perfect, but it did not take away from anything. Standouts for us were Robert Aramayo as Elrond, Owain Arthur as Durin, Sophia Nomved as Disa, Lloyd Owen as Elendil, and Joseph Mawle as Adar. Every time any of these were involved in a scene, I certainly felt far more engaged with what was going on. Though the rest of the cast for the most part did a pretty decent job with what they had, I feel like many of them were perhaps miscast. A good example of this I feel would be Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor. I feel like he's a fantastic actor, and I really enjoyed his performance, just not as Celebrimbor. It was a different and mostly enjoyable take on the character, but certainly not the route I would have chosen. As for the casting for original characters such as Arondir, they were very hit or miss. Arondir and Adar would be examples of original characters and casting that I very much enjoyed. Bronwyn and Theo, however, not so much. Overall, the casting didn't upset me too much. I feel like 99% of productions will always have the odd character that certain people will think is miscast. This show is no exception. The cinematography and visual effects were unquestionably fantastic for most of the show. In 8 episodes of television, I think there was only one effect that I did not like, and that was the warg. Overall, every effect, at least in my opinion, felt real, felt necessary, and felt impressive. The camera work itself was great. They didn't try too hard to make every single shot a crazy, swooping, complicated, epic movement to impress the filmmakers. They did it when it was needed, and it worked well. They managed to get some very impressive looks straight out of the camera as well. According to the cinematographer, I think it was Aaron Morton, I apologise if I've got that wrong, but he said that the colour of the post-Mount Doom eruption in the Southlands, was all practical. If true, that's pretty impressive. Again, I think that looked great. Many people were picking things apart, and there was one scene in particular where Bronwyn was given a speech, and you could see that many of the crowd extras had been copied and pasted. Well, at first this seems super lazy. I've also been informed that this scene was shot while COVID restrictions were in place. Fair enough, but they could have at least changed their wardrobe. Overall, the visuals were great. Enough said on that. The score is also another aspect of this show that I haven't heard anyone complain about. Bear McCreary did a fantastic job of creating something new for this show, while somehow still making it feel like it's part of the Middle-earth we already know. When we hear the Dwarven soundtrack, we instantly know it's for the dwarves. When we hear the Harfoots, we know it's got something to do with hobbits. I was super impressed with it, and if I never rewatch this show again in my life, I'm sure I will listen to many of the songs from the soundtrack. There's nothing better than editing videos about Middle-earth while listening to the soundtrack of Middle-earth. Great work, Bear. Now, when you look at a lot of the online comments and reviews, there are a load of complaints about the props and costume. They look cheap. They look like amateur cosplay. Weta did it better. Now, while I would agree that most of it doesn't hold up to the movie trilogy, it's not as bad as people are saying, at least to me. I really enjoyed the way the orcs were portrayed and dressed. The paler skin and the whiter clothes was a great choice. Arondir's armour was really original and intricate. The white Númenórean armour was one that seemed to get a lot of hate, but again, I enjoyed it. It was different, it looked classy and something that was representative of such a high class of being. They are the superior race of humans, and I think that armour is a good choice to show that. Although moving forward with Ar-Pharazôn likely going to be leading them, it would be sort of cool to see some golden armour. Now, I wasn't a fan of the armour worn by Galadriel and the elves. It looked just like big, oversized plates of steel that certainly weren't fit into the beautiful craftsmanship of the race of the elves. The swords, on the other hand, looked great. Galadriel's dagger that she took from her brother is like the complete opposite to the armour. It really shows off the intricate and stunning designs that the elves should produce. On the complete opposite end of the scale to that, the sword that Adar carried looked evil, dark and larger than life. Again, a great choice for representing one as twisted as Adar. Now, I believe hair comes under the same category as costume. This has of course been a major complaint since the release of the first load of images. Short-haired elves. While this has no impact on the story, so shouldn't really detract from anything or affect how you feel about the quality of the show itself, it does not make a lot of sense. It seems such a strange and completely pointless decision, which to be honest is my main complaint for it. Just why? It serves no purpose. How does Arondir have such a smooth fade? Are they elven barbers? I just don't understand. But again, I try to not let aesthetic choices like that affect my overall opinion on the show. So again, for the most part, though there certainly could be improvements and there were better options out there, the props and costumes were okay. Now let's get on to the story and the lore. We have 6 main storylines that we are following in this season. Khazad-dûm and the dwarves, Galadriel and her quest to find Sauron, Elrond and his journey to help Celebrimbor and eventually save the elves, Arondir, Bronwyn, Theo and their fight with Adar and the orcs to save the Southlands, the conflicts in Númenor, and finally the Harfoots. Now, while many of their stories eventually weave together, they are essentially the main stories that would have been plotted and outlined in the writer's room. I'll break down each of them and explain my thoughts on each story as choices for focuses in this show. Khazad-dûm. Now, I'm really happy that this was one of the areas that we were given as a focus. Seeing Khazad-dûm in its prime was an absolute highlight for me. The portrayal of the dwarves was also fantastic, and like I said earlier, we got absolute standout performances from Owain Arthur as Durin, and Sophia Nomvet as Disa. They were just 2 wholesome and fantastic characters. However, there were some issues with this storyline from the start, which I will get into when we get to the lore. The problem with this storyline is where they went with it. Mithril being the antidote to save the elves seemed very odd, with or without the connection to the Silmarils. A leaf waking up the Balrog. Anyway, lore points aside, it was the fact that, at least through the story of this season, the Dwarven storyline was almost completely irrelevant. All we really needed from it was a tiny piece of Mithril, which literally could have been done with Durin meeting up with his mate Elrond in a park sometime. Obviously, I'm massively exaggerating, but you get my point. I would have liked to have seen a storyline for the dwarves that was more about the dwarves, not just them accidentally solving a problem for the elves. Now, as for the storyline of Galadriel and her quest to find Sauron to take her revenge for the loss of her brother, boy, I hated almost every moment of this. First of all, this version of Galadriel is so far off how her character is intended to be that it's hard to even see her as Galadriel. I've heard people defending it by saying that Tolkien described her as Amazonian, and that's great. I have no problem with her being a warrior if I'm honest. It's great that she's a straight up badass. What I don't like is her stroppy teenager attitude, just demanding everyone do things, and if they don't agree, she just immediately turns to violence. Not only is that not Galadriel, it's not very elven. These are majestic, elegant and beautiful beings. Yes, they are also mighty warriors, but that doesn't explain this attitude that she displays. We only have to look as far as her scene with Adar, when she disturbingly tells him that she will make him watch as she kills all of his children and then will kill him last. It's just so evil, so twisted, it actually made Adar want to win. Yes, I was rooting for the bad guys, that's how much I disliked her character. Again, I've read all the defenses to it, how it's important for her to go through this and become the character we all know her as, so that she can develop a proper character arc and its character building, etc. Great. It's not for me. She's an ancient being that has been around for a very, very long time. She surely has the wisdom at this point to be a little calmer, a little more diplomatic. And let's just address the elephant in the room, shall we? She is also the one responsible for bringing Sauron not only to Númenor, but to Mordor and to Eregion as well. So this show is trying to tell us that Galadriel is responsible for potentially the downfall of Númenor, the creation of Mordor, and the forging of the rings. The season finale even gives us a scene of dialogue between Sauron and Galadriel where he tells her just not to tell the elves about him. Just let them do their work, let them forge the rings, which she does. Not only that, but she tells them to make 3 instead of 2. So are they trying to tell us that she's on his side? I just don't get it. It's either a complete misunderstanding of character or it's straight up bad writing. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. And while we're on the topic of Sauron, that was the big twist of the entire series. Halbrand is Sauron. Wow, didn't see that coming. Actually, yes. Yes, we did. From his very first appearance. In fact, if you go back and watch any of our live streams, we talk about how it's so obvious that he is Sauron that it almost couldn't be him. Yet it was. It was one of the worst TV twists I've ever sat through. I get that this show is more for casuals than Tolkien lore experts, but surely even the uninitiated would have known that something was up with him from the very start. Early on, Miriel tells Galadriel that she has brought with her the downfall of Númenor. She only brought one person with her, that was Halbrand. Who causes the downfall of Númenor? Sauron. You don't have to look very far into the lore to find the answer. and that is very disappointing. It felt like the writers tried to hide the twist by calling Sauron Halbrand instead of Anatar, but what did that really achieve? The people that didn't know the lore would be just as fooled by Anatar as they were by Halbrand. Very disappointing twist. I felt the same about the reveal of Mordor. They built that up as if it was a big reveal, but surely 99% of the audience understood that that was Mordor. There is so much about the Second Age that we don't know. They could have given us some cool new stuff, but instead, they made the main twists and reveals of this season just super obvious stuff. Now, onto the Elrond story. At first I was unsure of Elrond in this show, but as things went on, I grew to like him more and more. However, his storyline just feels a little all over the place. He just sort of helps everyone. A bit of a middleman. He is there to go between Galadriel and Gil-galad, to go between Gil-galad and Celebrimbor, between Celebrimbor and Durin. He doesn't really seem to have his own purpose, which for a character as important and mighty as Elrond seemed a little dull. Having said that, I still enjoyed his part of the story. As this storyline progresses into Celebrimbor needing to build a forge, I started to become intrigued. We get to see Feanor's hammer and hear references to the Silmarils and to Morgoth, which of course we very much enjoyed. He also mentioned the urgency to build a new forge. But what's the rush? Elves are immortal. Why would they ever need to build something in such a rush? Ah, it must be because Sauron is already in his ear in his Anatar form. But no, he only meets with Halbrand right at the end of the season. Halbrand that has been away from Eregion this entire time, don't forget. So the making of the forge cannot have been his idea. So why was there such a rush to build it? Well, they don't even bother telling us. It's almost as if they added the line to make us think that Sauron was involved, when it was actually completely irrelevant. And I feel like there was a lot of that throughout the 8 episodes. I have many more issues with this, but again, I will get onto that when we talk about the lore. Numenor. Now, seeing Numenor was a thought I was truly excited by, and while it looked great, our time there was underwhelming. Though Elendil was really cool and believable, wasn't the character I had envisioned. And Tamiriel's opinion seemed very easily swayed. It seemed like she was anti-elf one moment and then pro-elf the next. A switch which didn't really make much sense, seeing as her father, the king, was said to have been cast out because of his support for the elves. Pharazôn is another character whose motivations seemed off. It seems like he actually wants to be in power, and rightly so. But it felt as though he was doing his best to help Miriel as well, whose beliefs really didn't match up to his own. It was a little confusing. Oh, and let's not forget how they had Isildur killed. But let's be honest, anyone that has seen the movies knows that he can't be dead. So why even bother leaving that as a semi-seasonal cliffhanger? Again, it's almost insulting to us as an audience. Now on to the Southlands. Now this is something I thought was a great addition. A good choice for a story to follow. A twisted, corrupted, tainted dark elf who sees the orcs as his children and is just looking for a home for them. So they are no longer cast out as slaves, but can live lives of their own. I thought this was great. Having him essentially as an opposing figure to Sauron is such a good idea, and a lot of his dialogue was great. The performance was very good in my opinion, and I enjoyed pretty much all of his scenes. That being said, I also feel like he was perhaps underutilized. This story basically results in some random old man from the Southlands founding and creating Mordor. I wasn't impressed by this choice. I had always pictured seeing Sauron attempt to create something in his vision, using dark magic to cause the volcano to erupt. It could have been epic, it could have been evil, but instead it was just some random guy that used a magical sword that was built up as being some epic weapon, was actually just a key. A literal key. Super disappointing. Hopefully we'll get to see a little bit more of Adar in future seasons, or a lot more. A rivalry between him and Sauron could be quite epic, but we will see. As for Arondir and Bronwyn and Theo, while I was hoping their story would lead somewhere, it just completely faded away after the arrival of the Númenóreans. The human and elf relationship thing was disappointed as a storyline, as we know that this only ever happens a handful of times within the history of Middle-earth. Every time they did a classical "is she dead" trope with Bronwyn, which was multiple by the way, I was actually hoping she was. So maybe Arondir could go off on his own or join Galadriel and do some cool elven stuff. But no, he stays with them and just fades into the background as a character. Again, a huge letdown. Finally, we have the Harfoot storyline. Now, let's be honest, without the addition of the stranger, no one would have been invested in this story whatsoever. Which is fine. You could say that about anything. Take Durin out of the Dwarven storyline and it would be less interesting. I get it. The issue here is that every time it cut to this arc, it slowed the show down drastically. They clearly wanted this to be the big mystery of the show. Is he Sauron? Is he Gandalf? Is he a blue wizard? Etc. They wanted viewers theorizing and guessing. The issue is, and we stated very, very early on, that he really can't be Gandalf if they choose to stick to the lore. But guess what? He turns out to be Gandalf. Or at least that's what they're suggested to us. At this point, all we really know for sure is that he is one of the Astari, a wizard, and his last line is, "Follow your nose," which is a Gandalf line, so I think it would be a little naive for us to say that he could be anyone other than Gandalf at this point. The introduction of the mystic cultist girls was sort of interesting, but the main one seemed weirdly overpowered. She burnt down the Hearth at camp with just a blow. She clearly had some kind of control over fire, yet she was a new character that had powers more powerful than we've really seen before. I don't know, I feel like we would have heard about her. Anyway, enough complaining, let's talk about the lore. Now, where to begin? Mithril comes from a Silmaril. Incorrect. Gandalf potentially arrives and hangs out with Harfoots in the middle of the Second Age. Very wrong. Durin the Third and Fourth were alive at the same time. Completely erases the idea of Durin being reincarnated. A Balrog awakening at this point. They're a few thousand years off. Sauron spending a day or two with the elves before helping them make the Elven Rings. Nope, he should have been there for a very long time. The Elven Rings being made before the 7 and the 9? Nope, wrong order. Gandalf arriving via meteor. I don't even know what to say about that. Gil-galad being able to send elves to Valinor. Nope, he doesn't have that power. Mordor being created with the turn of a key by some old man. No. Then there is the fact that Galadriel states her husband Celeborn is dead. I'm not sure I want to call this a lore break, as he could potentially come back in a later season, so we'll hold on to that one. Elendil has a daughter for some reason. They've shown lots of her, but none of his other son, Anarion. It seems as though Miriel and Galadriel form the last alliance while Elendil is off to the side crying. This seemed very odd to me, seeing as the last alliance should be formed by Elendil and Gil-galad, and it should be a big deal. Hopefully, that wasn't the moment. There are many more lore changes, but these are a few of the major ones. Now, we have stated time and time again that lore changes are acceptable when they make sense to the story you are telling, when they are necessary for adapting page to screen. Peter Jackson made many changes, some were drastic, but a lot of them were logical. Whereas so many Rings of Power changes just come across as changes for the sake of it, just to be different, just to keep us guessing. I don't even know. Is there a reason that Mithril has to be an elf saving substance and come from a Silmaril? Maybe to make the rings? No. The reasons they are forged originally would work just fine. What do we really get out of having two Durins alive at the same time? Nothing. Yes, there is a good father-son dynamic, king and prince, but Prince Durin could still have been a prince, and his father could still have been a king. All it tells me is that the writers did not understand the source material. How does Gandalf arriving at this time make any sense? It just doesn't. Look, it may still potentially turn out that he's a blue wizard. After all, he's going east. But from what they are showing us, right now, it's Gandalf. But it has no need to be. Other than to please super casuals, but again, I feel even the casuals would understand that this strange man is just a different wizard. No need for them to introduce a character that we are familiar with, especially when they're keeping his identity secret for most of the season. It just felt like they were so desperate to have mysteries, which seems like they would be revealed in this big, shocking twist, that they just threw these things in. And it's a little upsetting. And insulting. As huge fans of Tolkien's work, this show was very exciting to us. We really wanted it to be good. We defended it as much as we could from the start. We were super optimistic going in. But the further into the show we got, the more cracks were revealed. As disappointed as I am, I don't want to give up on the show. I hope they listen to the fans. I hope they make the changes to the writing team. And I hope it improves moving forward. We know that Season 1 faced a lot of challenges, a pandemic being one. But realistically, all that really did was give them extra time in the writing room. To conclude, I'm going to give this season 4 out of 10. The 4 are for some of the cast, the music, the visuals, and the set design. The story and the lore-breaking changes are what really lets it down. Overall, we are very disappointed with the first season and truly hope it improves moving forward. I'm hoping they take this 2-year break and use it effectively and efficiently to make a better show. One for the fans. If you guys like this show, then that's awesome. I truly want as many people as possible to like this show. These are just our thoughts and ours alone. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.